We can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar with the British Romanian Chamber of Commerce. I'm Neil McGregor, I'm the chairman of the Chamber. I'm very pleased that we have a very distinguished panel with us this afternoon. If you look at the chat box, I will paste here the details of the Chamber's webpage, which has brief biographies of our panelists. And our panelists, I'm pleased to say, are the Head of Policy at the British Embassy, Goran Mandic. We also have Inga Tsigai from Ernst & Young, and we have Florin Balcan from Provident. Unfortunately, we were hoping to have the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, he's been detained on other matters, but I'm sure that our panelists and others with us can probably give you a very interesting discussion this afternoon on taxation after Brexit. I would say, as a lawyer here, one thing that we do not advise on is tax. And that, in my experience, is because a lot depends upon how Romanian taxation law and practice is interpreted. And one needs to be dealing with this every day, in my view. One doesn't dabble. I leave it to the people who know much better than I do to advise upon those kind of things. So we are recording this session. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box or in the questions and answer box at the bottom. Our opening remarks will be given by Goran Mandic, Head of Policy at the British Embassy. Goran, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks ever so much, Neil. And it's really good to see so many participants today at this event. As you said, I'm Head of Policy at the British Embassy, and I've been in Romania for just over 2 years now. And as you can imagine, during that time, quite a big chunk of our policy work has been very much focused on EU exit agenda. And we've had to overcome quite a number of challenges in ensuring that the trade deal is signed on time, that it delivers for both the EU and the UK, and that the rights of citizens in both of our countries are protected and secured. And I'm pleased with the progress to date and very much grateful to the Romanian authorities and government for helping us get here. A year ago, I think, if you were to imagine this type of event, you probably would have come up with a long list of issues that would need to be still resolved and fixed between our two countries. And I'm glad that that is not the case. And what is important now is to really look at some of the practical aspects of our future relationship with EU member states. And the double taxation agreement is one of the important things to look at. Understanding the expectations of many interested actors, and especially on the business side, is very important for getting the relationship right. So across different business sectors and industries, how we can meet those expectations and interests, either through government to government or government to business or business to business engagement, is something that both of our governments are looking at very closely. And it is helpful for the embassy, but also for our trade colleagues and experts back in the UK to understand what local concerns and issues and interests businesses have, so that we can ensure that they continue to feature in our strategic engagement between the two countries. So today's event is very much helpful in that respect. As some of you may have noticed, we've recently had our UK Trade Minister visiting Romania, who came with very much the same objective in mind, to really understand business expectations from both Romanian and British companies, and how he and his Romanian ministerial colleagues can assist you in creating a more conducive business environment and environment with fewer barriers to trade and investment. So it was extremely helpful to hear from the Romanian ministers and authorities how interested and willing and actually open they are to strengthening our bilateral economic and trade links, and doing so through really timely and constructive engagement. Of course, we are still not out of the dark in terms of the pandemic, which is clearly, as you would all know, impacting significantly on business operations and business planning. And that was one of the main reasons why the UK government last week decided to postpone the new implementation of new border controls for trading goods to and from the UK, which were initially due to start this coming summer and now are delayed until January 2022. Because the government has recognized that the actual scale and significance of the challenges that businesses have been facing and adjusting to all the new rules and requirements post-transition period, whilst at the same time dealing with impacts of the pandemic. And that brings me really to the topic of today's event, which is the double taxation agreement between the UK and Romania. And although in technical terms, although the event is organized under the umbrella of EU exits, in technical terms, it is important to recognize that bilateral double taxation agreements were not linked to EU negotiations specifically. And in this particular case, actually, the existing agreement precedes even Romania's membership to the EU. But the main issue caused by EU exit negotiations is the loss of the benefits for UK businesses under the interest and royalties and parent subsidiary EU directives. And these eliminate withholding taxes on intra-group payments of interest and royalties, as well as on dividends paid by Romanian subsidiaries to their UK parent company. So from this year, Romania is free to withhold taxes on the relevant payments in accordance with the local Romanian laws, but subject to provisions of the existing bilateral double taxation agreement. So the view of the British government has always been that withholding taxes on cross-border payments represents a barrier to trade and investment. And that is one of the specific barriers that our government will seek to remove in our upcoming double taxation agreement negotiations. So I strongly agree that the timing of this event is very well organized. As some of you, or most of you will know, that the existing double taxation agreements between the UK and Romania dates from mid-70s, and therefore the time is right to start talking about the new agreement. And today's event is actually an opportunity to hear from the audience what kind of concerns and views you have, so that we can properly share these with experts who will be around the negotiating table when the time is right. And we are starting to secure and seek endorsement at the highest level, both in the UK and in Romania, before the negotiations at the technical level can start. I must say, I'm slightly out of depth here talking about double taxation agreements. It's not something that I have background in. And I'm very glad to see real experts on the panel today who will be able to offer us a more comprehensive perspective on the trade agreements and expectations from businesses in relation to that. So really talking finally about experts, I would like to introduce my colleague from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in the UK, Tom Matthews. Tom is a policy advisor on double taxation agreements. And he kindly offered to join us today and to hear what the audience and participants have got to say and share on this particular topic. And I think Tom also offered to answer any questions that he can in his capacity. So I should stop here, Neil, and I wish you all a very good discussion and a very successful event. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Goran, and welcome, Tom. Nice to have you with us. I've often asked, in my capacity as chairman of the chamber, what I think of the Brexit situation. And as I always point out, there are two things that are completely unaffected by Brexit. One is the double taxation treaty, which, as Goran mentioned, predates EU accession. It doesn't quite predate UK membership of the European community, or the common market, should I say, but it's been there for quite a while. And as I think has been said, it is worth revisiting, particularly in view of the change of circumstances, not just the passage of time. And the other thing that's important, again, unaffected by Brexit, is the bilateral treaty on investment protection. And again, that hopefully will be looked at as well. Now, as I mentioned, on tax matters, I will say, yes, we are aware of the fiscal environment, but we ourselves do not advise on tax matters. Please go and talk to someone who knows about tax matters, i.e. one of the accountants. Now, our next speaker is in exactly that category, Inge Tagai from EY, who is, you're a qualified accountant in Romania, I believe, as well as a director in EY. And just to warn you that there are already some questions coming up in the chat box. I can see, you'll see one in there, which you needn't answer immediately, but they're coming. So Inge, welcome.
Hello, everyone, and I'm so happy to be in this panel list and also to have you in this webinar. I hope that in this time frame we'll be able to cover as many things as possible. Maybe to talk less about the VAT and about things that you typically hear and focus more on the general picture. So indeed, we are now at the moment where we can say clearly that the UK departure from the EU had several impacts on businesses, included implication from regulation standpoint of view, legal, financing, operating model, foreign exchange, and of course, our topic today, tax. So from a tax perspective, Brexit gave rise to several changes, but it's also worth mentioning that some things remained the same. And among those things, you already heard about the double tax treaty. So indeed, I am Inga Tagai, I'm a director with EY Romania, and today my points that I would like to cover are around a few elements, like let's look at the stages that the taxpayers' position have been during this period and how they have been affected due to Brexit. Also, let's look at the areas of impact and challenges that legal entities had and also natural persons. We can go through some corporate tax aspects, personal tax, immigration, and so on. And why not, let's reflect towards the end upon lesson learned and maybe share some ideas and recommendations that we feel would be very well received during this year by the businesses and individuals. Yeah. And I must say that we have not had so much action since January 2007, when Bulgaria and Romania became member states of the European Union in the fifth wave of EU enlargement. So indeed, with everything going around Brexit, there were many things that led these taxpayers that we are looking at to these three categories that I'm looking now, and they are around the companies that are fully prepared, they are fully transformed. So many of them, for instance, performed the reviews, the gap analysis, stress tests, and acted upon those to capture the benefits that, for instance, the EU directives had until recently. And they could benefit of this favorable tax treatment as compared to the companies that would go on would undergo this process now and will have to rely simply on the provisions of the double tax treaty. And there is a second category that wasn't an expectation. So they did try to attend seminars, talk to advisors, perform some gap analysis, but they were waiting for something bigger to come up and to solve their problems, and they did not act upon anything. And of course, there is also another category, as Goran mentioned earlier, the ones that are in the dark, still in the dark. So I hope not many of you that are attending this webinar have been in the dark until recently, because there are many things that need to be looked at. So let's think, for instance, of what it is now as key areas of impact that the companies have, and what this means for their tax costs. Yeah. So while we were preparing for the webinar, we were talking about how much tax a company should pay, and the answer is they should pay the fair amount, the right amount of tax. And now with this situation where we can no longer benefit from applying EU directives as we could until now, we should follow the provisions of the Romanian tax code. Yeah, and also these tax exemptions that have been in place for non-residents income are also lost. There were interest payments, royalties that were commercially agreed under contracts, and there were dividend distributions to parent companies located in the UK. And now their tax treatment solely relies on the double tax treaty concluded between Romania and the UK many years ago. So the bad news is that this treaty does not, unfortunately, provide for exemptions. Quite on the contrary, I would say that the rates under the treaty are relatively high rates as compared to other conventions. For instance, Romania have been looking at other conventions, and we have a good example of Austria, a convention that was renegotiated. So maybe this is the right time to also benefit of this change and of this adversity with Brexit, and use this opportunity to discuss more about the Romanian and the UK Convention for the avoidance of the double taxation, and revise the provisions and revise the quota. Then moving forward, regarding the things that remain the same, nothing changes in the Romanian fiscal code as regards the practical aspects that are required for the application of the convention. So for instance, if you have transactions such as payments to the UK companies, then of course you should be already used to obtaining and using tax residency certificates. Another hot topic on the tax agenda this year was the MDR, which is DAC 6 mandatory disclosure regime. In this specific case, the mandatory disclosure rules for UK do not apply any longer. So the UK is following the OECD standards. They did have some changes in the legislation, which made the reporting simplified to only one hallmark, the D category, with a temporary application. So this was the good news for the companies that had to capture this reporting. Then moving forward, of course, we should look also at the natural person and individuals that are affected by Brexit, because as we were reading in the news these days, over 700,000 Romanians obtained a residence right in the UK. So according to the statistics, it makes the Romanian minority second largest after the Polish one. I think the good news there was that the process was open for a long time, and this registration was done electronically. When we are looking vice versa, as the British citizens and their family members who reside in Romania and wish to remain here, they have to go through the renewal until the end of this year. Also, it's important to mention how these new rules affect businesses, because many businesses rely on human resources. They want this human capital. They want the expatriates. They want the things that they can bring to the businesses. And especially in this time and age when there is a scarcity of some resources, they really need these resources fast. So what we are seeing is an increased request for people to come here on business visa. And I would remind everyone that they can use their business visa to stay here for 90 days within 180 days period. However, it's important to mention that this is not a moment to use this trip for lucrative activities, because this is a provision simply introduced for ones that are present in Romania for business meetings, for trips, and basically any activities which are not lucrative. Probably another very important point was around social security, what happens, how the rules are changing. Indeed, Romania did not opt for the posting provisions under Article 11 of the Social Security Agreement. So, moreover, our authorities are looking at the back-to-back assignments for cross-border situations. So again, there are complicated terms over there. The positive side, however, is that for reporting purposes, we did have rules for non-EU and non-treaty countries. So this means that businesses can continue their operations. Individuals may undertake social security reporting in Romania, and also benefit of Romanian social security and health benefits. And also very important aspect now, because yesterday our vaccination platform opened. I think it's an important point to mention that COVID vaccination access is open. It is open to individuals that are legally residing in Romania. So as long as you hold a Romanian immigration paper, you may register for vaccination appointment either through the platform, by phone, and so on. So it does not depend on the contribution made to the Romanian system. Since I'm coming towards the end of the time slot allocated to me, I would just say that there are a lot of elements and lessons learned. I would probably try to look at 3 directions which I feel that other countries are already looking at, and maybe Romania should keep a pace with those. So one is around the VAT issue. There is a gap in the VAT legislation, and it's worth talking about the possibility to expedite discussions for signing a reciprocity agreement for VAT refund and follow the terms of the 13th VAT directive. Also, because Brexit triggered a lot of paperwork, I think it's also important to consider for smaller businesses the possibility to register in Romania without a fiscal representative, because normally this type of representative is applied for countries that raise certain risks, and you can all agree that UK should not be regarded as such. And we could look at Italy and Poland that are already taking some steps into this direction. Of course, a big part of the conversation should be around the double tax treaty between Romania and the UK, which I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, I think we should also look at some countries like Estonia that provides e-residency program, and maybe Romania should also look at some e-residence rules allowing companies to operate in Romania as EU companies through branches or companies that are registered as fast as they do in Estonia, for instance, within 1 day, and then they are run completely remotely. Not that you wouldn't need us tax advisors after that, but still, I think we should look at this situation and consider how we can provide these companies with easy access to opening businesses here, opening a bank account, conduct e-banking, use international service providers, declare their taxes here, and basically going digital. So I'm here to discuss any of these points, of course, with you. I know that we, on top of the tax, prepared you also a British weather outside. It's raining here in Bucharest. But please don't get affected by the weather and be as active as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inga. Interesting indeed. Now, our next speaker is Florin Balcan, who is the country manager of Provident Financial Romania. Previously, he was with Citibank, and he's also been with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and you can find his details on the Chamber's website page, which I pasted in the chat box. I'm very pleased to have worked with Florin and his colleagues on other matters. They're a big supporter of the Chamber, and they're one of our founder members. And they're also very very much involved in working through the chamber in presenting the voice of members of the chamber through Coaliția pentru Dezvoltare României. Florin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Neil. And thank you for this invitation. I speak on behalf of Provident Financial Romania. And while we are discussing about this subject, we thought it would be really good if we present as well kind of the commercial part. So let me just give you a bit of a background on us, just to have a full understanding of the picture. So if you can, my colleagues can help me with the slide. Okay, so Provident, one of the most important British investments in Romania, second largest British employer. To be honest, I have some questions right now about it. I think there are, some others coming from behind, but still one of the top in terms of number of employees in Romania. As well, we are part of the International Personal Finance Group, a leading international home credit and digital provider of consumer finance with 1.7 million customers in 11 countries. And IPF is listed at the London Stock Exchange. In Romania, we are here for what will be 15 years today, and serving over 1.1 million customers and issuing loans more than 1.3 billion euros. And I think we are very established in this period with more than 60 branches across the country, serving the people across the villages and the rural area. And as Neil mentioned, with a strong presence in the business community, trying to help the BRCC, trying to help the Coalition for Development of Romania. Now, today's topic is very interesting for us, and we wanted to provide you our case study. If we can go maybe to the second slide. The case study we thought is good in order to have a better picture of the post-Brexit developments at the fiscal level for the British companies operating in Romania, maybe for the other countries as well. The main purpose remains to discuss the effects of the direct taxation for the investments between Romania and UK, and to raise the awareness to the business environment on the double taxation that could occur in terms of financing and dividends. And of course, if possible, we would have liked to kind of talk to the authorities and identify the ways of improvement. Unfortunately, we couldn't have today the Mr. Secretary of State, but maybe with a different occasion, we'd be able to do this. Inga has gone through a lot of details in terms of the double taxation. What I would say is just that, a bit on a technical side, we know that based on the source principle, income obtained by non-residents from Romania are taxed at source with Romanian withholding tax. At the moment, the withholding tax applicable in Romania is 16% for interest and 5% for dividend payments. And as my predecessors mentioned before Brexit, when the European directives were still applicable, interest and dividends were not taxed in Romania with withholding. And, that was, the directives were aimed at encouraging investments and eliminating all this double taxation. As a positive aspect, we still have the international instruments for this matter. So the double tax treaties to reduce the withholding tax rates. In particular, the one that Goran was mentioning, the double tax treaty between Romania and UK, which has indeed been signed in 1975. So there is a clear good moment to have a look at it. Under this double tax treaty between Romania and UK, for the interest, we can benefit of a reduced withholding a rate of 10%. And in terms of dividends, the withholding tax rate from the double taxation treaty is higher than 5%. So it's basically not bringing any benefits. But now let's look at the, our clear case. And if we move to the next slide. If we look at Provident, we have a balanced strategy to finance our business in order to serve our local customers by way of either drawing loans from group or also local banks. In our perspective, using funds from abroad and injected these ones in Romania, obviously had a significant contribution to the local economy. Our strategy is aligned with the group one and with the other home credit businesses that we have across Europe and across the world. And basically the group needs to attract financial resources in this respect. This is done by ways of issuing bonds to the investors. And as an example, the group has in place since 2010 an Euro medium-term note program, which allows the group to issue bonds in different currencies with maturities up to 5 years. And we had the last Euro bond refinanced in November 2020 for more than 300 million euros. Now, for the financing that we obtain from the group, Provident Romania has to pay an interest accordingly. As compared to the interest paid to a Romanian bank, and as new effect of the post-Brexit, starting with 2021, we now need to compute an withholding in tax in Romania and to pay the tax to the state budget. But in this situation, the interest could be, and it is taxed twice because it is both in Romania, but also in UK at the level of UK lender with a 19% corporate income tax rate. So, you know, if we consider that Provident has an average group borrowings, we looked at the 2019-2020 at about 40 plus million RON a year, clearly this creates an impact on overall on the group expenses. Now, the purpose for our example is just to raise the attention to everybody to revise their financing structures and to check the correct tax treatment applicable in Romania, even if we talk about loans drawn from UK, but also from other countries, as withholding arises in respect to interest paid to non-residents. Now, clearly, there can be other measures and other ways in which to reduce this double taxation at the level of the lender in its residency country, but this doesn't mean that, you know, we could get away with eliminating double taxation fully. So in this respect, it still remains that the double taxation treaty that we heard, you know, Goran talking about, create the right framework in which this can be held. And for us, if we look as well at dividends, because obviously, you know, we take the money from the group, we give this money to our customers. Customers pay back, and obviously the group makes a dividend based on our profitability in Romania. We've seen in the dividends as well that right now the dividends paid to non-resident shareholders are taxed with a 5% withholding tax. While if we look, for example, in case of Romanian shareholders, there is a better legislation provision as the dividends are exempted from withholding if they fulfill a certain criteria. If a shareholding of more than 10% for a minimum of 1 year, sorry, is obtained. Therefore, for our particular case, in the event that Provident will pay dividends to its shareholders, which, by the way, when you're listed to the London Stock Exchange, it's something that you are kind of expected to do on a regular basis so that the shareholders continue to invest in you, then basically we will need to withhold 5% on those dividends as well. Now, obviously, we looked at what we identified to be an issue, and we said, fine, then what can be a proposed solution? So looking at this, we have tried to see what can be done on the local market, what can be done, you know, on the discussions that will happen, bilateral discussions between Romania and UK. And if we go to the next page, we are thinking that right now, as well, having a good number of experts in the public, maybe we will be able to brainstorm and to kind of invite a discussion to see whether we can find other opportunities. But one potential alternative that we thought was that will be to introduce some favorable changes to the local law to ensure basically the same treatment for non-residents as compared to Romanian shareholders when we talk about the taxation of dividends, where we said that basically if you have a Romanian company as your main shareholder, you will not double tax them. The other part goes obviously into the double taxation treaty renegotiation of some relevant clauses which can help the business sector. We had a look at the withholding regimes that are applicable in the double taxation treaties that Romania has with other European countries. And we consider that there are some good examples in other conventions as well, which allow even for a zero withholding taxation in the source state. And here, Inga mentioned Austria. We can have here a list where we can share about Ireland, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Switzerland. There are a lot of other countries already. We found nine of such cases where, yes, indeed, you need to fulfill some conditions, but usually they are quite acceptable conditions and quite easy to fulfill. So, but you can get up to zero. So in my view, I think that's the aim and the direction. And I think that probably is the right time to raise these questions and the awareness to our colleagues and that will be working into this type of double treaty taxation arrangement. So thank you again for the opportunity to have this lot. Now I invite everybody to address questions for our presentations. And Neil, you can take it from here.
I think as we have a guest today, perhaps could invite Tom to say a few words on what he thinks. I'd say the Chamber is there to promote trade and investment between Romania and the UK on a bilateral basis. Now, I think members would say that as long as we understand clearly and can plan for taxation, it's uncertainty and changes that business doesn't like. So it's interesting that Goran mentioned that this can be seen as a barrier to trade and investment. I hope you'll come up with a very good result in your discussions with the powers that be. So Tom, have you any thoughts upon the position, please?
Thank you, Neil. It's in terms of what the UK government wants to get out of its double taxation treaty network, and that's aligned with the general policy of the UK to have a competitive tax regime as part of its platform of being a good place for people to do business, and double taxation agreements are part of the tax landscape, the tax environment. And when we're talking about the reasons that the UK is a good place to do business, the UK's broad tax treaty network is one of the factors that leads to that conclusion. That obviously relies on those tax treaties being competitive. And you and others have mentioned the fact that the UK treaty with Romania, dating from 1975, when looked at in comparison with other European countries, at least, is not competitive. The rates of withholding in those treaties are lower than the rates in the treaty between the UK and Romania. And that's something that we are aware of, and that's something that the UK in general would like to lower. So whenever we negotiate a tax treaty, it's our objective to eliminate withholding taxes on cross-border flows of passive income, so dividends, interest, and royalties. And we do that because, as was said earlier, we think they create a barrier to cross-border trade and investment to the detriment of both countries. So, and that's reflected in UK domestic law. So under UK domestic law, we don't have any withholding taxes on dividends. We don't have withholding taxes on many forms of interest, including interest paid on listed financial instrument, on debt securities. And it's also a policy that we seek to promote through our network of double taxation treaties. So it's our preference to have zeros in the dividends, interest, and royalty articles of all UK tax treaties. Now, any tax treaty is a product of negotiation. We don't ever get what we want, and neither does the other side. It's always you always end up with a compromise. But our record shows we have over 130 tax treaties around the world that it is possible to reach a compromise that's acceptable to both parties with all sorts of jurisdictions. Now we announced back in 2015 that we were going to talk to Romania about updating the tax treaty. Then we did have some discussions. We got a long way along the line, but unfortunately they didn't come to fruition in terms of a new replacement tax treaty. we say that the tax treaty is uncompetitive at the moment in terms of rates, but when you looked at the tax treaty combined with the effect of the EU directives that have been mentioned before, so the parent subsidiary directive and the interest of minority directive, a lot of that lack of competitiveness was effectively removed because the directives overlaid the tax treaty and gave a better result. But obviously, since the 1st of January this year, that's no longer the case, and that's a situation that we are aware of. I want to address both in respect of Romania and indeed other European jurisdictions where that's also the case. So it's something that the government is aware of. It's something that we want to address in line with general policy, and it's something that we are keen to engage on with our partners in the EU to update our tax treaties and find a solution which we think is to the benefit of both jurisdictions. So I'll probably leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions that people have. But obviously, in terms of the negotiation process, the technical negotiations is a confidential process. We wouldn't kind of negotiate in public, but obviously once the text is a replacement text is signed, we would publish that. So we are able to move quickly, prepared to move quickly, but obviously it takes two to tango, but we will see where we can get to as quickly as possible. And I think we share the objectives of the people that have spoken already today. I just saw a question flashed up on the screen in terms of how long does it take to negotiate a tax treaty? Well, it can be anything from a couple of weeks to a couple of decades in some extreme circumstances. Now, obviously, we would hope that that's not the case here, and our experience last decade suggests that certainly wouldn't be the case here. But it's not overnight. There are legislative procedures that both countries have to go to in order to give effect to a tax treaty. We have to put the tax treaty before our Parliament, and Parliament has to approve it, and it generally comes into force the following fiscal year. So any change wouldn't be immediate, but we would want to do it obviously as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we all wish you the very best of luck in your negotiations. In terms of how long it's going to take, I suppose we might say, how long is a piece of string? It takes as long as it takes, but I hope it'll come up with a good result both for the UK and for Romania, as I'm conscious that we're now seeing Romanian investment into the UK. As has been mentioned, Romanians are now the second biggest diaspora of Europeans in the UK after the Poles. And with all the various post-Brexit trade deals that the UK is now doing, one would hope that it would be an interesting place for Romanian business to invest as a means of getting into the wider world. Anyway, we can see. There are a variety of questions we've been asked. Some I can see in the chat box. The first one I can see is regarding VAT, and a matter on which I know very little. Perhaps, Inge, can you help with that, please?
Yes, in terms of VAT, the rules are quite complex, and I've looked at the question, and there are many things in the background which I would be happy to clarify. So I would just encourage the person that left the question in the chat to reach out to me. The details will be provided after the webinar, and I'll be happy to discuss in private tomorrow and go through the details.
So Olivia, I think you'll find the details of or contact details of the panelists on the website. If not, please ask us and we can pass you his details and she can respond to you in more detail on matters. I've got other questions. I can see one here. As regards, is it fair to say that on a double taxation treaty, it's not a question of how much you pay, it's a question of where you pay it, if it's done properly? And is there competition? It always strikes me as being a little bit hard to grasp at first when you talk about double taxation treaties being anti-competitive. Now, to my extent of view, yes, you're going to pay a particular rate of tax. Yes, I can understand that withholding tax can be seen as a barrier to trade and investment, but we're not talking about people paying tax twice on the same income, I hope. Are we?
Sorry, is that a question for me, Neil? So,
whoever wants to answer, but thank you for volunteering.
So ideally, no. I mean, that's obviously the core function or purpose of a double taxation agreement is to make sure that people don't pay tax more than once. But when you're talking about withholding taxes on gross amounts of income, you fairly quickly get into a position where you end up with double taxation that's not relievable. If you, for example, interest that's paid to a bank, if you have withholding tax at 10% on that interest, but the bank's on the gross amount of the interest, but the bank's only taxed on a very small margin of profit that it makes in relation to that interest, then you quickly get into a situation where there's taxation which there's no way of double taxation, which there's no way of relieving. So that's one of the reasons that we think that withholding on cross-border amounts, gross amounts of income is a bad thing to do, because it leads to excessive taxation. The result of that excessive taxation either can mean it becomes uncompetitive for a company to lend into a jurisdiction, or it can simply mean that costs are increased for local borrowers or local users of IP, because they effectively have to pay more to take account of the additional tax burden that the lender or IP owner faces. So that's one of the reasons we would say it's uncompetitive, and double taxation agreements are not just there to relieve double taxation, but also to make sure that excessive taxation doesn't take place.
And of course, there are situations where we are talking about a rate applicable to different tax bases. So there, the local legislation comes into force, and you have to follow the local rules. And for a certain income, we might find a calculation formula according to the Romanian tax code, which leads to effective taxation higher than, for instance, according to the UK domestic rules, where you can deduct certain things which in Romania you cannot. So each business needs to look at their operations to understand if their effective tax cost is also higher due to these factors. And sometimes the answer is not always in the double tax treaty.
I suspect also if taxpayers perceive that they're being treated unfairly, that must be an incentive to evade taxation, which is not in anyone's interest, I think. One of the other things I've noticed when I came to Romania is many what I thought of as British companies were in fact invested through the Netherlands, because it was perceived at the time that there was a more attractive double taxation treaty with the Netherlands. Is this a fair view, or is it a view you'd argue with?
I think it's fair to say that the Dutch tax treaty with Romania has better rates in it than the UK tax treaty with Romania. So in terms of the amount of investment from the UK to Romania that goes directly compared to via other jurisdictions that are perceived to have more favourable networks, I'm afraid I don't have any data on that. But obviously any situation which leads to companies or groups thinking that it's better to invest indirectly rather than directly creates an inefficiency that's avoidable if we have an agreement that's on the same terms as the Dutch. But obviously, while the directives were in place, then it wasn't that uncompetitiveness wasn't necessarily there. But now, since the 1st of January, it's fair comment that there are a number of treaties between Romania and other jurisdictions that are more favourable than that, which it has with the UK.
Thank you.
I completely agree with Tom with what he said, but as a tax consultant, I always mind the overall picture, and I don't want anyone in this webinar living with the idea that immediately they need to restructure everything through Netherlands, because it's not one shoe fits all, and business needs to look at the overall picture and understand if they have substance in order to reorganize their operations in a way that another treaty is interposed. So there is always a substance above form, and I would strongly advise everyone to consider this, not only the let's say that the rate itself, and what fits one business could not fit another one.
Thank you. I can see Adina has a hand up. Adina, would you like to talk? Hello, Adina. Hello. No, perhaps not. If you have a question or would like to talk, please put a note in the chat box. I can see you're currently muted, Adina. Do you want to ask a question? No, perhaps not. So moving on, one of the other things I notice, the Romanian expression in English is fiscal paradise. In English it's tax haven. And I know I've had to explain the difference between the UK and the status of places such as Guernsey or the British Virgin Islands. Is there a degree of misunderstanding between how far Romania is looking at the double taxation treaty with the UK, which imagine the Queen is the head of state, and also places like the British Virgin Islands, of which the Queen is also the head of state?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that that countries that we are talking to want reassurance that the agreement that they're signing up to is an agreement with the United Kingdom government and doesn't extend to cover the Crown dependencies, the UK Crown dependencies, and the overseas territories, which have their own tax regimes. They are fiscally independent from the UK, despite the fact that we share a head of state. And that's achieved as a technical matter through the definitions in the tax treaty. The definition of the UK doesn't cover those jurisdictions, so it doesn't apply to transactions between Romania and Jersey, Guernsey, or the Cayman Islands, etc. So yes, it is a point of confusion, but one that we can quickly resolve when we're talking to our counterparts.
Thank you. Is there a feeling among you that the tax, I would say that there are two legs to this. One is the double taxation treaty, and the other is the bilateral investment protection treaty. Now, to some extent, if you're taxed fairly under one, it has implications for the other on fair treatment of a foreign investor. Would you see it necessary to try and look at both treaties together, or can you look at the DTT in isolation?
We do look at the DTT in isolation. I'm not an expert in bilateral trade agreements, but there are obviously read across between the conditions in the two, but there will generally be a clause in a bilateral investment treaty which ensures that the double taxation treaty has precedence in areas in which they overlap. So, for example, if there's a most favoured nation provision in a trade agreement, it's generally clarified that doesn't extend to advantages afforded under bilateral double taxation agreements.
Thank you. There's a question. Once you have a draft DTT in reasonably final form, will that be published for consultation? Will it be open to, let's say, further changes in the light of comments on the consultation?
So not in the UK. So as I said before, the process of negotiation is confidential, and that applies up until the point that the text is signed. So once it's signed, we would publish the text, and at that point people have the opportunity to comment on it. But we would very much hope that that doesn't involve the need to make changes. It's not to say that's never happened, but as you can imagine, once you've thrashed out a compromise between between the two governments. It's not something which is particularly easy to go back and revisit. If there are technical deficiencies in it that we haven't noticed, there's a legal scrub on both sides, so that really shouldn't happen. But if there is, then we would have to amend the text, probably by way of a amending protocol. But it's not something that we would routinely do.
It's good we're having this session today, for which thank you all very much, and thank you to Goran. Has there been a call for input or comments to either side upon comments on what could be better in the double taxation treaty? And can I was going to say users, but can taxpayers submit suggestions?
Yeah, so again, in the UK, we run an annual consultation exercise, what we call our treaty network overview process, where we invite comments from stakeholders on the general state of HMRC's or the UK's tax treaty network. And as you can imagine, for the last few years, that's been dominated by requests to update treaties with EU jurisdictions. Engagement hasn't been easy or necessarily possible while the kind of Brexit process was ongoing, but now that process is over, then there is no barrier to us talking to winning treaty partners.
Thank you. Inge and Florine, is that something that you can assist with on the Romanian side, say through Coaliția?
So definitely, whenever there is a need to improve the legislation and the tax framework, I think we have a very strong business community here in Romania. We have various groups that are working closely with authorities in order to make sure that the legislation keeps pace with the businesses, because always businesses are moving very fast and we need to catch up in a way that one, reflects their operations, and secondly is adapted to our current reality. I would just say that if businesses are active with this kind of suggestions, there would definitely be talks in various groups, be that the Foreign Investment Council and other communities, Chamber of Commerces, and the authorities have been always open to talking to the businesses in order to capture their feedback. But again, I would also refrain by saying in how much time it's going to take, because again, if we are looking at some other examples, we are looking at time frames which are quite large. One, for instance, was around the Social Security agreement with the US, which is missed for many, many years, and we still don't have it. So we need to be optimistic, but also realistic about the time frames.
Florine.
And from our side, Neil, I mean, supporting what Inga says, we have always been more than open to collaborate within all these chambers or all these forums where basically we have our experts participating. So whenever we can give a hand to the authorities, come with our local view, with our group view, our combined commercial, view from the ground, I think we're more than willing to provide it, and we are there.
Thank you. I think as Tom has indicated, the time to raise your views upon the matter is now, as Tom has said. Once it's published, it's signed, and it's hard to fix or make other changes at that point, as one can easily understand.
More reasons to be happy to be in this webinar, basically.
Absolutely. Now, I'm conscious that some people may not want to ask questions in a public forum, but again, if we through the chamber can assist anyone here in wanting to put private points of view or private questions through to our participants, I'm sure we'll be very happy to assist, and please contact us if that is of help to you.
The truth is, that's why I started my speech by looking at the companies and business environment in these three categories, because I think in all honesty, we will start seeing these questions popping up only now when they are facing the reality and when many more businesses are facing the hurdles of dealing with the new rules. Yes. And let's not forget that it's not only about the companies that can afford a tax advisor or can afford a specialist dedicated in their company to look at these matters, but we are also looking at the backbone of any society and any economy, which is the small and medium enterprises and these businesses which are affected, and they are just now realizing what this means for them. So we need to be also conscious that it's happening now and they are only now readjusting. And of course also the public, because I was telling someone that I'm going into this webinar and they were telling me, oh, can you just ask someone where I cannot ship my precious roses from the UK any longer, because this business in UK that is operating there says they cannot ship to Romania any longer. So indeed, many companies are facing these questions, and they should know that they are this kind of environments where they can bring in their questions and can access information. And then, of course, we are happy that also Tom's view is quite open to these suggestions that we are managing to collect and reflect upon.
Yes, and I'm sure again we are able to pass on comments to Goran and his colleagues in the embassy, where be they tax rate or be they not tax rate, there are issues of, shall we say, rough edges appearing around the post-Brexit agreement. But let's hope that those can be resolved quickly to everyone's satisfaction. We are coming up to the hour. Adina, I think you're online now. Did you have a question you wanted to ask? No, I don't think so. So if there are any other questions, can you please put them in the chat box? If not, we will wind up reasonably on time. One thing that I would have said is that looking at the title, everyone is concerned by tax for obvious reasons, but it's a fairly dry subject. And I think putting it in context, as Tom did, about the interest you pay, which is you can't deduct it, that shows how this is an important thing. And it's actually not just a question of where you pay the tax, it's a question of how you can use the tax to have a fair result. And that's an important for us all to bear in mind. And right, do we have any other questions? If not, I will thank our four speakers for this afternoon. It's been extremely interesting. Have you any final comments, Goran? You're on mute, sorry.
Thanks, Neil. No, not really. It's been really interesting to hear, obviously, the speakers and to also understand what kind of questions participants have. The point of consultation is obviously an interesting one, but I think there are avenues throughout the year when businesses can do that, not directly linked to negotiations as and when they start. And it's been really very much. Thanks ever so much to Tom, who's been really helpful in just clarifying some of these things, which obviously are driven by the systems and processes in place that we've had for many years. So again, something that really precedes EU exit agenda by far. So thank you all.
No, we're always very pleased to cooperate with the embassy on these kind of events. So thank you very much. And Tom, Florine and Inga, thank you very much for your contributions this afternoon. And to our participants who put up questions. Anna, this is not our last webinar for this month. What do we have next?
Oh, thank you so much, Neil. Thank you again to our panelists for the very informative session of today. I know taxation and especially treaties on taxations are not sometimes are not a very pleasant discussions and approaches, but you did a wonderful job, so my sincere congratulations. And speaking of treaties, next week we're going to have a webinar on the UK-EU trade agreement, where our experts will discuss more about the latest updates and also about the challenges and opportunities regarding it. And in 2 weeks' time, we will have an informative seminar for Romanian companies willing to launch on the UK market together with our member Retina. Of course, if you are interested to learn more about our events, you can check on the web link I just typed in the chat box. You can register and learn more about our events there. I'm looking forward to seeing you at our online events, and hopefully soon enough we will be able to meet face-to-face as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
If I can just say, there's the last question I can see that's come into the chat box, Inga, for you. I'll let you follow that one up offline. But I should say we are slightly early, and that for those who don't realise that the UK tax year is not the calendar year. So can I wish you all la mulțan for the new tax year on the 6th of April. And otherwise, wish you all a very good afternoon and evening.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.